EVÓDIA was born in Philippi, a city that never seemed to sleep. There was the clink of coins, hurried footsteps on the cobblestones, loud voices mixing Greek and Latin. The city pulsed like a restless heart, full of Roman soldiers, bustling markets, and temples dedicated to gods who seemed to hear no one. EVÓDIA grew up in this setting, the daughter of a simple family, accustomed to the comings and goings of life and the ever-watchful eyes of the soldiers. She was not one to go unnoticed. Even as a girl, she had a steady gaze and a curiosity that even the city walls could not contain. She listened to the stories of the elders as if chewing on every word, and asked too many questions, which left the adults speechless and her peers speechless. The days passed between household chores, the buzz of the square, and that strange feeling that there was something more waiting for her beyond the dusty limits of Philippi. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. If this content touches your heart and you want to support us, feel free to click on the Thanks a Lot button. All help is welcome and makes a big difference. Her name, EVÓDIA, which meant good path or good journey, was almost a provocation of fate. Every time someone called her name, it was as if they were planting an idea in the air, that she was going somewhere. But where and why? In her youth, EVÓDIA already stood out as someone who thought differently. She didn't follow traditions just for the sake of it, nor did she bow down to any shiny statue. She looked at the altars and felt empty. Something inside her knew that outward faith wasn't enough. It was as if heaven was waiting for the right moment to speak to her, and it would. It was on one of those ordinary days, while the city went about its business as usual, that someone arrived in Philippi with an unusual message. A tired man, with marks on his body and fire in his eyes, spoke of a God whom no one had ever seen, but who knew every name. The city was in an uproar that day, but EVÓDIA sensed something different in the air. It wasn't just the heat that made the fabric stick to her skin or the buzz of the market. It was something else, something deeper, like when the wind changes direction out of nowhere. She heard that there was a stranger in town, a man named Paul, who spoke of a man named Jesus. The name sounded strange, but she couldn't get it out of her head. It was like a bell ringing softly over and over. She didn't think twice. She grabbed her simplest cloak, wrapped it around her shoulders, and headed to the riverbank, where people used to gather away from the soldiers' eyes. There, sitting on the dirt, a group listened to the man speak. He didn't shout, he didn't make empty promises, but every word seemed to carry weight, as if it were engraved in their hearts. EVÓDIA stood still, listening. The man spoke of a God who did not live in stone temples, but within people. A God who saw hidden pain, who forgave the unforgivable, and called the forgotten by name. It was crazy, but it made sense. A kind of sense she had never felt before. For the first time, it seemed that someone was explaining what she had felt since she was a girl, that there was more, that she was part of something bigger. That same day, EVÓDIA believed. It wasn't spectacular. There was no thunder or lightning. It was as if a door that had always been there opened very slowly, and she walked in. From then on, the riverbanks were no longer just a place of passage. They became a meeting place, a place of prayer, of change. But living faith attracts attention, and not all of it good. As the message spread, so did resistance. EVÓDIA's name began to circulate, and it wasn't long before other strong figures crossed her path. EVÓDIA was no longer just a listener sitting by the river. Now she spoke, and when she spoke, all attention turned to her. It was different to hear from someone who knew what it was like to carry doubt in their heart, to live in a harsh city, to question the stone gods. She did not speak beautifully like the temple masters, but she spoke with truth, and that, at that time, was worth more than any memorized speech. Soon, meetings began to take place in her home as well. A simple room, smelling of fresh bread, and the sound of prayers mingling with the crackling of the lamp. There, people gathered to hear about this Christ, who freed without charge, who welcomed without asking where a person came from. EVÓDIA led without realizing it, with a firm manner, without being harsh, with authority but without raising her voice. Of course, this bothered some people. A woman teaching? A woman praying aloud? A woman being a spiritual leader? In the minds of many, it was almost scandalous. But EVÓDIA didn't ask for permission. She just did it. What many saw as rebellion, she saw as obedience. After all, if God had given her a voice, why should she keep it silent? It didn't take long for the church in Philippi to grow, and with it, so did her responsibilities. EVÓDIA had to deal with all kinds of people, the curious, the suspicious, those who had been hurt by other beliefs. And then she learned that leadership wasn't just about talking, it was about listening, enduring, and often swallowing hard. But there was something else. A fellow missionary, another woman, another fire. Syntyche. A strong name, a striking presence. Together they walked, led, faced challenges until the day their union turned into tension, because where there is passion, sometimes there is also friction. And that's how their story began, not as rivals, but as forces that found each other on the same path. EVÓDIA and Syntyche were like two torches burning in the same place. They illuminated, they warmed, but every now and then they also burned. When they walked side by side, nothing seemed impossible. While one spoke, the other prayed. When one fell, the other held her up. They had similar visions, firm faith, and courage to spare. They were sisters in spirit, though so different in manner. EVÓDIA was more direct, the type who got straight to the point. Syntyche was more strategic, thinking before she acted. In the beginning, it worked well. It was as if they complemented each other. But over time, their differences began to cause friction. Small details turned into arguments, a harsh word, a misinterpreted silence, a judgmental look, and before they knew it, a wall was growing there, low, almost invisible, but firm. Meetings became tense. The atmosphere was heavy. Those who had previously learned from both of them now tried to understand what was happening between them. And no one said anything, not even them. Each one remained steadfast in their faith, but their hearts were already wounded. And the most curious thing was this: even though they were divided, they continued to lead, they continued to serve, they continued to be examples. But inside, there were cracks. The situation spread like wildfire. Outsiders were already commenting. And there in Rome, imprisoned but still alert, Paul heard what was happening. He did not ignore it. He wrote a letter, one of those letters that pierce without shouting. Amidst so many instructions and advice, he mentions the two of them by name. He asks them to understand each other, to think the same way, not as someone choosing sides, but as someone reminding them of what really matters. The letter arrived folded, stained by time and the hands that carried it. It was small, but it carried enormous weight. EVÓDIA held the parchment carefully, as if she knew that inside there was something that could change everything, or at least reveal what she already felt, but could not yet say out loud. When she began to read, the world around her seemed to stop. Each word from Paul pierced the paper as if it had been written just for her. He didn't beat around the bush. He knew things. He knew what was going on. And then, there it was, her name. EVÓDIA, black on white, not in some corner but right there, in the middle of a letter that would be read by everyone in the church. A direct call, without mincing words. Paul asked that she and Syntyche have the same way of thinking, the same heart. And he didn't say this only as an apostle, but as someone who knew them both, who had seen with his own eyes how much they had fought alongside him for the gospel. Being named in that letter was not just a slap on the wrist, it was a reminder, a way of saying, "Hey, I see you, and so does heaven." Paul may have been far away, imprisoned, but he saw what not everyone else saw, the potential that existed in both of them, even amid the friction. EVÓDIA closed her eyes for a moment. The letter was still in her hands, but her mind was far away. She remembered the days by the river, the first time she heard about Jesus, the butterflies in her stomach when she started teaching. She was no longer that curious young girl. Now she was a role model, and her name was written on a scroll that would travel the world. Paul's letter became more than just paper. It became a mirror, and EVÓDIA, seeing herself reflected there, understood that she could no longer sweep the dust under the rug of faith. Leading now was like walking barefoot on broken glass. She had to smile while bleeding, talk about love while struggling not to explode inside. People looked to her for direction. But who pointed north when she was the one who felt lost? The tension between her mission and her heart began to tighten. There were days when she woke up in high spirits, ready to teach, welcome and serve. But there were days when even the sun seemed to lack strength. On those days, she hid her fatigue behind firm words. EVÓDIA had learned that people respected certainty, but few knew the cost of maintaining that stance. And it wasn't just Syntyche. It wasn't just the letter. It was everything at once. It was decisions that no one saw. It was the veiled pressure to keep the church united when some wanted to divide it. It was having to deal with ungrateful people, with gossip disguised as concern, with demands that came like stones. Her silence was often mistaken for weakness, when in fact it was a shield. EVÓDIA had discovered that swallowing certain words hurt more than saying them. At night, when everyone left, the house was silent, and that was when the questions came. Was she doing the right thing? Did God still see her? Was the burden really his, as Paul said, or was it now weighing only on her shoulders? But even though she was tired, she didn't give up. She kept going, because behind the exhaustion there was still that old fire, the same one that started back when she heard about a God who saw the invisible. And that fire, even though it was trembling, was still burning. But on the outside, the conflicts were multiplying, and from outside, the arrows were also coming, accusations, opposition, threats. Because leading, at that time, was not just about guiding, it was about surviving. There were those who thought that the greatest danger was the Roman soldiers. Others spoke of false teachers, strange doctrines, external threats. But EVÓDIA knew that the hardest fight was the one no one could see. The one that took place there, deep inside her chest. While her body remained standing, her heart fought silent battles. She no longer slept well. Her head was always full. Her thoughts were jumbled. Her prayers seemed to fly away and never return. On the outside, she remained the same firm leader, always present, with the right words on the tip of her tongue. But inside, she was a battlefield. Sometimes a dirty look or a poorly chosen phrase was enough to make her chest tighten. It was a mixture of sadness and anger. But anger at what? At whom? She didn't even know. It was as if she were fighting something that had no face. A tiredness that didn't go away even with rest. EVÓDIA tried to remember the early days. The river, her encounter with Paulo, of the chill she felt when she heard about Jesus. That living faith, strong, almost unbearable, because it was so real. And now she felt like she was walking with a backpack on her back and stones in her shoes. It wasn't a lack of faith. It was the wear and tear of living under pressure, demands, expectations, and yet something inside her resisted, not out of stubbornness, but out of conviction. Meanwhile, outside, the siege tightened. The city no longer looked kindly on that group that refused to worship Caesar. Meetings had to be more discreet. Visits were watched. Some brothers began to disappear. Others began to deny their faith. And she stood there, firm, but wondering if it would last. Because even those who have faith sometimes falter. Even those who have been called sometimes cry in secret. EVÓDIA began to notice this little by little. One here, another there. People who used to pass her by on the street now stopped to ask questions, to listen, to ask for prayer. Some came with their heads down, others with suspicious looks, as if they were carrying their whole lives on their shoulders and were afraid to believe again. But when they spoke to her, there was a way of opening their hearts that even they didn't understand. It was as if their pain recognized hers. Her home became a meeting place, not only for prayer and teaching, but also for welcoming others. Inside, widows felt seen, discredited young people found direction, newly freed slaves learned that they also had value. EVÓDIA didn't need to promise anything, she just was, and that was enough. Her simple manner, her attentive eyes, her genuine listening, all of this touched people in a way that no rehearsed sermon could. One night, a man knocked on her door, soaked from head to toe. He had lost everything. His wife, his children, his good name. They said this was a place to start over. EVÓDIA listened, offered him a dry cloth, a plate of food, and stayed there, by his side, without rushing. The next day he returned. Then he brought another. And so, without her realizing it, that little home became a refuge of faith. She still felt the weight of her struggles. She still woke up with a tight chest, but there was a certainty growing there, along with the new faces. The certainty that her pain was not in vain. That even though she was hurt, she was healing. Even though she was tired, she was guiding. Even though she was silent, she was teaching. EVÓDIA's hair already had white strands, but her eyes still had that old sparkle, that fire that even time couldn't extinguish. She no longer spoke with the same strength as before, but when she opened her mouth, everyone listened. It was as if each of her words were dry wood catching fire, simple, but capable of igniting any extinguished heart. No one called her leader with titles or pomp, but she was. She was the kind of person who only had to be around to change the atmosphere. She had presence, she had weight. The younger ones approached her with respect, sometimes even afraid of not measuring up, but EVÓDIA never demanded perfection from anyone. She only wanted truth. She always said that God did a lot with little, and that the little each person had was enough to get started. She didn't preach like she used to. She couldn't even welcome so many people into her home anymore. But she still wrote. Short letters, simple advice, phrases that seemed small but had the depth of the sea. Sometimes one of her notes was enough to prevent a division, a giving up, a fall. The days were quieter now. Visitors came, but they left quickly. Time passed differently. And when she walked through the streets of Philippi, few knew that this slow-moving woman had already faced so much inside and out, that she had helped form a church when no one believed that women could lead, that she had endured conflicts, threats, and even abandonment by some who had sworn allegiance to her. Still, she remained discreet, whole, like a candle burning in the corner of a room. The light did not attract attention, but it prevented darkness from taking over. And yet, the end was approaching, not in a sad way, but like the end of a season that had fulfilled its purpose. Over time, EVÓDIA disappeared from the streets of Philippi. No one knows for sure when her last meeting, her last letter, her last word was. She faded away slowly, like a fire that turns to embers, hot, alive, but silent. There are no records of her death, no famous tombstone, no monument, no special place in the temple, but there is no need, because her name had already been written where it matters most, in the living history of faith. Even without many details, what remained was her mark. Because she did not live to be seen, she lived to serve. And for that very reason, her name has not disappeared. It has withstood time, centuries, and change. It survived the dust of traditions, the oblivion of so many other figures of the time. EVÓDIA, the woman who listened by the river, who taught at home, who led with courage, who cried in silence, continued to be remembered. To this day, every time someone opens Paul's letter to the Philippians and reads that verse where her name appears, a bridge is built. Ordinary people understand that they too can be part of it. Because EVÓDIA was not rich, influential, or perfect, but she was willing. And God used that. It is curious to think that for some, she was just a mention, one name among many. But for those who know the weight of the journey, They know it is not about how many times the name appears, but how much it carries. And that is where the secret lies, because EVÓDIA's story does not end with a full stop. It continues. In the other women who rose up after her, in the leaders who mirrored her strength without a stage, in the anonymous people who understood that heaven sees what the world ignores. EVÓDIA's life shows that not every story needs applause to be great. She did not lead with shouts, she did not live surrounded by crowds, nor did she seek the spotlight. And yet, she was a giant. Because sometimes the greatest impact comes precisely from silence, from constancy, from hidden faithfulness, those things that almost no one sees, but that the whole sky recognizes. We learn from her that being called by God is not synonymous with an easy path. EVÓDIA faced opposition, internal conflicts, rifts in friendships, doubts that hurt more than the stones thrown at her. But she kept going, not out of pride, but out of conviction. Not because she was strong all the time, but because even when she was weak, she knew where she was going. We also learn that leadership does not have a single form. EVÓDIA led by listening, by her presence, by example. She did not need to compete or prove herself all the time. Her steadfastness came from her heart, not from her title. She understood that God does not call the perfect, He calls the available. And when someone says yes, He does the rest. Another powerful lesson is in the way she dealt with her wounds. She didn't hide them behind a spiritual mask. She felt, she cried, she fought, but she used all of that to bring healing to others. EVÓDIA is the portrait of someone who transforms pain into comfort, weariness into shelter, faith into action. And finally, we understand that legacy is not about how much you appear, but how much you transform. Her name appeared once, but it echoed forever. Because the strength of a seed is not in its size, but in what it generates when it finds good soil. EVÓDIA was soil. She was a seed. And she was a tree, all at the same time. And maybe that's why even today, when we hear her name, something inside us lights up, as if she were saying silently, keep going, it's possible. If you liked EVÓDIA's story and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming adversity, be sure to like this video and share it with your loved ones. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Together, we will explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.